Okay, we didn't discuss everything, but we came pretty close. I'll be right back. Gracious Gang, it's Mike Creavey, host of the Gracious Guest Show, and that's what you're watching right now. If you have not done so already, please make sure to like this video, share it far and wide, subscribe to the channel. I've got a lot of great content here for you, and those of you who are returning already know that, and those of you who might be new, I think you're in for a real treat. So today, I'm excited to welcome my brother Matt Creavey back on the show. Matt was on a couple years ago. He talked about the Peshtigo fire, which was a very just strange episode and very heartbreaking, but there's also some very interesting spiritual aspects to that as well. So I invite you to go back and check that out for sure. I've linked it below. And Matt he's almost 11 years younger than me. He's my baby brother, but now that he's approaching 30, it makes me feel old. At any rate, Matt is, among other things, he's a chaplain assistant in the U.S. Army Reserves. He also is a businessman. He kind of runs his own handyman and remodeling kind of business, which we have benefited tremendously from this summer. So I can't recommend him highly enough to you if you're in our area, for sure. He kind of does everything. And also, he is someone that I just very deeply respect. Someone who takes a very serious and thoughtful look at things around him. He thinks very deeply about things. And as a fellow husband and father, he and I discuss basically marriage and family. We get into just thoughts on the church and education and U.S. History and politics and all kinds of fun stuff. So I just love chatting with him, and we decided we wanted to sit down in the middle of a work day, grab a beer, and just kind of talk about everything we could. So without further ado, let's jump into my sit down with my brother Matt, where we talk about everything we possibly can in that time. Check it out. All right, Matt, welcome back to the Gracious Guest Show.
Well, thanks for having me, Mike.
So I wanted to ask you, you just had your 5th anniversary?
Yep, 5th anniversary, June 29th, 2019, we got married.
Okay. So how's that going?
Well, it's going great. I mean, it's been an absolute blessing. I can't believe how far I've come personally, just in those years, how much my faith has grown in that time. We're blessed with 3 little ones, and we have a 4th on the way.
Nice.
So 4 and 5 years. Yep.
Keeping you guys busy.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I heard though recently, I was asking somebody, I forget how many kids they had, but they said, yeah, after 4, it gets easier.
Yeah,
so
you've pretty much seen it all at that point. Yeah.
We'll see.
if they were right. Oh my gosh.
I think, it's neat already how you can see that they start to become their own community. The oldest, Anne Mary, thank you God for sending her first, that she's, able to, in her way, she can't do everything, but I mean, like, she's able to help with, the other 2.
Yeah, we've seen that with Noelle, because she's, so for those who don't know, my eldest is 7.5, and then our baby boy's 6 months. So that's been fun, because there's a bigger age gap there. So I think you guys have that to look forward to, in the sense of as Anne Mary gets more physically able to hold children, that becomes very helpful. So, and I think doesn't that seem like that's kind of what part of the kind of God-given gifts, there's so many of them, of bigger families, always kind of had as part of it, and like you kind of hear it anecdotally, or if you have older family who came from bigger families, and they'll talk about that, like everybody helping out on the farm or something, or in the shop, that when there were family businesses more, and that kind of thing. I think of things like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
like a natural thing, right? Yeah.
Growing up, I know our summers were always spent at Nana and Pop-Pops, and even after school, we'd go to Nana and Pop-Pops, and we'd be there with our cousins, and that was a great time. And that's something I not necessarily took for granted, but just didn't realize until later that that's not something that everybody has.
Yeah.
You know,
not as ordinary, or not as as common maybe as it was, or well, even as it is in some places probably today, you know, like where there is a bit more of that family culture.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something we just always had. And I don't know, I mean, like, do you remember ever realizing that that's not something that everybody had, or was it?
I think to the extent that like some of our friends would mention it, or just they would, like when they'd be brought into the sort of into the
Friday
ambit a
night
little
dinner.
bit. Yeah, like the Friday dinners or some sort of event, you know, like a bigger family event. Or even just like coming over and hanging out over the summer or something, or you know, seeing that. Sometimes they'd comment, especially if they came from like, if they were an only child, or like a younger child. So like my friend Tim, you know, I grew up with, shout out to Tim, he's probably watching. But yeah, Tim, because you know he's the youngest of two, and there, you know, was a pretty good gap between his sister and him, and you know, as close as they are and always have been. You know, he just in terms of peers, you know, like that was you know, an element of being able to be with us kind of in that environment, you know, and kind of becoming like a brother in that sense, you know. And so but it is interesting, we were talking earlier in a completely unrelated context that we won't go into because it can get a little personal maybe, but just, you know, some of the things that you run into where, you know, you see in you know, friends or extended family or whatever the case might be, sometimes you know, challenges, you know, right, where there is a, you know, you like sometimes you can feel closer, right, to some like friend or some colleague, some coworker, someone in your parish than someone in your own family sometimes. And just how, you know, that's not out of the ordinary. I think everybody probably has some experience of that. I think we've been very fortunate that we've been pretty consistently close with our siblings and you know, like you know, cousins and most of our close family. But you know, every family has some family members where, you know, you may not be close to, maybe a variety of reasons that is, but that reality that, you know, there's some mysterious connection that we have that seems to go deeper than blood.
Yeah. And that's well, I think two parts to that. One, naturally, as families get bigger, you're not going to be able to keep in contact with everyone. You know, like so our grandmother's side, our dad's mother's side, that Rosenberger side, they used to always have the Rosenberger family reunion. And that, did they do that Christmas and in the summer?
It was Christmas and summer.
And so twice a year,
they kept that going for decades. It just sort of fizzled out, I think, or at least in our engagement with it, when it became the next few generations or just a cultural.
Well, it gets too big.
It's too big, right?
Eventually, it gets too big to where, you know, what holds you together eventually dies off. I mean, in short, that, and then two was just that your what keeps you together in a society, in a family. What does Christ say about it? Something about, you know, my brother and my mother and my brother.
Oh, who are my mother and my brothers?
Right.
You know, those who do the will, the will of God. Yeah.
Right. So that's, if, you know, what you place highest in that hierarchy of, you know, if you're all aiming towards that, you can stay together a lot longer. But eventually and I guess, you know, if you place the highest thing first, you can stay together forever. But you only have so much time in a day, in a year, in a month, you know. Yeah. And that's something else with biblically, the blessings and curses going, I think it's to the third and fourth generation. It's like the Rosenberger blessing of having this large community, this huge family that stuck together and always met. Our great grandparents, right? So,
well, yeah, because there were
1, 2, 3. So to the fourth generation.
Yeah, Gamma was Dad's grandma. So there's, you know, 3 generations back, and she had. There were 13 brothers and sisters, if I'm remembering correctly. 11 of whom survived, you know, childhood. There were 2 that had died when they were very young. That would have been like in the 1920s, and it was a big span too, I think, because it was like she was, I want to say, number 4 or 5 or 3 or 4, somewhere in there.
Okay.
She wasn't the oldest, but so she had a couple of older siblings, lots of younger siblings, and that spanned, like 19, I don't know, 04, 05, something like that, until like the late 1920s. So it's like a 25-year span, one full generation. That's what I think's so neat about that word generation, like that. So for them, by God's blessing, right, like that whole time, there's this openness to life and this constant kind of openness to generation, so to speak, of a whole generation, being generated, if you want to put it that way, through those years, and growing as brothers and sisters, but also over a big gap, like we've seen in our family. But there's fewer of us, and so that's I think when you have a bigger family, or at least if a family's spread out over a longer time, I feel like you get more exposure and overlap to different times in general. Like, there's different things going on in the society. There's different things people are connecting with. And the constant seems to be within that family. And so that was kind of cool, because I think, like you said, as it got bigger, and I think that happens with any organization or even parishes, right? Like you see this sometimes, like a parish, it's a decent sized parish, or whatever size it is, small, medium, or large. It's something happens where they get like a really great pastor, or someone really, a great parish manager, or a great youth minister or something. And there might be this explosive growth, and this thing happens that's exciting to be part of, and it's really expanding. And then very often it becomes like too big,
right?
Or become, and that's when you get, some of the negative things that can come in, where, a too, like mechanistic, or too sort of like out of touch with the individual person kind of,
right.
And so I've sometimes thought about that with, in our parishes. Sometimes you'll see these plans, like, how are we going to grow the parish or grow the school? And I'm usually like, why? Like, do we, like, do you have to grow it? Like, is there something that we should focus on at least as much, namely, how to try to preserve what made that growth in the first place?
Well,
I kind of jumped subjects there, but I think it's related.
Right. And thinking about this kind of with the military.
Yeah,
how do you?
There's another one. Yeah.
How much recruiting does special forces do?
Right.
Like, none.
They seem to get who they're supposed to get.
Right. They're not worried about numbers. They're worried about having the elite, and then the elite of the elite you never hear about, and like that's there are those who want that, and if you focus on being the best, you'll attract what you're supposed to attract. You know? And it will grow. And I think that kind of goes with anything. It's not, when you get focused on the numbers, you lose the focus.
Yeah.
If you're worried about numbers, then you're not worried about the right thing.
Or if that's the only thing you're thinking about,
right?
I wonder why that happens. Why do we think that there is it's a win if you get a big number? Like, because some people wouldn't even quit. You're like, well, obviously. I'm like, no, why is it obvious? I don't understand why. And I think about this with schools sometimes. Like, we were just talking to some of my wife's, family. We're visiting her aunt and uncle, and Hal and Ree, if you're watching, hey, all these shout outs today. But they were just talking about sort of, the old days, or just some of the schools they went to, like in the Philly area, some Catholic schools. And I was thinking of a broader reality, right, of the challenges that you hear about a lot with Catholic education. And in one sense, it makes sense. They'll say, okay, well, here were how many kids were in Catholic education in the 60s. Mm-hmm. Here's how many are in it now. And you can even just look at the averages compared to the population. And that's a very troubling statistic, right? You can look at all the demographic issues. But by the same token, they were talking about like how big the schools they went to were. And in both cases, it was my father-in-law and then, his sister, my wife's aunt. And she was saying, I want to say she said there were a couple thousand at their Catholic school. And my father-in-law, was saying that there were several hundred at his, and I think he said 700 or so. And so the school I teach at, Trinity, right now, we have like 550. And that's a lot smaller, than like our public school we went to,
Right.
which itself wasn't really huge.
Yeah.
But to me, it's just like, to me, I'm not surprised, I guess, that you're seeing more and more all the time with like classical schools and other different models. The idea of the smaller school is really catching on with a lot of people these days. And I wonder if that's not part of why. It's just this cycle of like,
right,
bigger's not always better, and you can get lost.
Quality
in the
quantity.
shuffle, Yeah.
And I mean, you need to have, somewhere in between there. You can't just have, if you focus on perfection, then you're not going to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
But you also can't just focus on mass production and not produce anything.
Yeah. Well, and you have to be able to sustain it, obviously, because there are some benefits to perhaps, like, and again, not just with, I think this goes with anything we've been talking about with a school, any school, not just a Catholic school, with a parish, with a military unit, like there's some wisdom in the way that we over time came to structure, like how big a company should be, how big a battalion should be, or even, that ongoing question. There's a difference of talent pretty widely between different priests, for example, different skills being a pastor. But how big is too big of a parish for one man to be able to realistically administer?
Yeah.
I
guess it depends on the man.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a big part of it. I've known priests who were very, very humble. I really respected it. They had a position for a while, and they were like, they petitioned the bishop and were like, "Bishop, like, I love my priesthood. I'm Jesus' priest. I'm telling you right now, I am not suited to this task. Like, this is not what, and sometimes that's honored, and they'll find a different position for them. And,
and that's,
you and I can't do that, though.
Right.
Like, Lord, like I just said that the other night in a prayer, it was like an angry, gripey, shameful prayer of mine. But I was like, Lord, it's like, I am not suited to be this kid's dad. Like, I was like, our 4-year-old was just really, testing me on something. I was like, thanks a lot for making this impossible for me.
But that's what's amazing, is that somehow you are, that this was,
it's grace.
Right. It is. We are not suited for the job, and you look at the Holy Family, and, Saint Joseph, all right, you're in charge of, she was conceived without sin, and God.
Right.
Like, no, like, that's, you can't, no man could possibly succeed at that task. But by the grace of God, you can, because God can do all things, and that's, the rich man. That's something I've heard before, where they, trying to justify, the rich man entering the kingdom, that, by way of the eye of the needle. But if you just read on, Christ says that it's impossible.
Yeah.
You can't.
Right.
But with God.
Right.
There's nothing you can do
to
get into heaven. And there's nothing you can do on your own. And that's, everything we have is thanks to God.
I've been really struggling with that, with just I was just saying yesterday, so we got sort of the update that our dog, so Petey, I don't even know if I told you this, I think I did tell you. So Petey needs a double tooth extraction.
Does he floss?
Well, I'm telling myself it's his fault and not mine. Like, there's part of me that's like, maybe he needs a double tooth extraction because I'm like a terrible dog stew. I don't know. It was like, but I give him dog food. We tried to brush his teeth, and and then I was complaining too and saying to Christine, I was like, we never had to do this. I was like, we never had dogs lose teeth when I was a kid. She's like, yeah, but they were all big dogs, and little dogs are different. And I'm like, little dogs are different? Yeah. Okay,
I've heard
it's like,
that.
Why didn't somebody tell me? So I'm like, okay, so maybe not hip dysplasia, but he's going to have teeth, constant dental work, I'm joking he should get like a gold tooth or something, or just like wooden teeth.
I think so.
But not, that comes back in the estimate. Well, let me back up. So she tells me that, and I start to just immediately catastrophize and I go to Google, for some reason, because Google is our God very often. Like, let me consult the Oracle. And, but, to be fair, I'd like, okay, how much is this going to cost? And you do it, and like now the AI generated, let's search all of Google and give you a really average answer and make you think it's actual like analysis. It's just data mining.
Yeah.
AI is a whole other topic, but it says on average $500 to $2,500. So what I do when I see that is I go immediately to like, oh my dog, it's gonna right, there goes $5,000. So now, and I get all mad and upset, and I start thinking of all this stuff of like, there's only so many legal things that I can do to make more money, and there seems to be no end to what they can do to take it away from me. But then, it came back, and, the estimate we got was like 1,100. So like even like in the lower third of that range. But it wasn't before I did my little thing of just immediately jumping to the worst case scenario. But the reason I bring that up is the whole exercise I went through is one of like me, my stuff, my resources. Like, I want my money and I don't want my money taken away, and it's not fair. And it's like, so I know I have a lot of growing to do in the category of like, everything is actually God's.
Yeah.
And I will trust him with providing.
Right.
So that's a tough one, I know, for me, of that, like, you just want to see it. Like, you've done some extra work, you got a paycheck coming, and it's like, it's gone before you get it. But instead of being grateful that you have it, and there you go.
Yeah, there's another interesting meditation I've had with the Holy Family is that, like, we know they're poor, because the turtle doves at the temple. Right. The temple offering.
That social status, right?
Right. And if they were upright and just, like, it's not like they were skipping the rules to, they were giving what was just. So they didn't have money. But do you think they ever wanted for anything?
It doesn't seem like it.
Yeah.
I know they did. Yeah. There's not even a hint of it.
Right. So like, what does that look like? I mean, we'll never, I don't think the scriptures really, I don't know that you can really read into that from the scriptures of what did the home in Nazareth look like as far as what they had, other than they had everything. They had God. That's, so I'm sure, I doubt Jesus was hungry other than his own will and fasting.
Well, and what's so cool about at the heart of that too is there's a deeper reflection on like God's nature himself, because that's the reflection of God, the poverty of God, that strictly speaking there is no, like, in God himself there really doesn't seem to be any experience of a desire for gain at all. Like, it's the most fundamental thing to God's nature to give. Right. And to be complete self-gift, and what God has, properly speaking, is the experience of perfect giving away. So you can make the argument that he is poverty in a sense itself. And
right.
What this really sank in with me is
the poor in spirit.
That's because I feel like that then you're truly free, right? Like, we went to a couple years back to help some friends clear out the house of, like, one of their parents had passed away. We were going to clear out the house, and the other parent had died not long before that. So now it was the grandparents' home, and the parents who were little, who were more of like our parents' age were clearing it out. We went there to assist, and I just remember thinking, like, this, I can't wrap my head around how long this process is going to take for these poor people. Because, like, 20th, 21st century American home, it'll give you a like heart attack or like some anxiety produced, like, because it was just every little possible trinket, like, and I'm not saying that they were greedy, just totally normal American family. And I came away from it saying to my wife, I was like, there's part of me that just wants now to start thinking, like, and I don't know how I'll ever do it if it's realistic, but it's like, wouldn't it be great, like, if when I die and, like, we're clearing a house out, like, my kids come in and the place is empty, completely empty. And all there is, in theory, there's like 3 or 4 little treasures that I got some pleasure out of in earthly life that I've left to them that will give them some memory or something. And that's it. Not like, what do we do with this, this trinket, this Easter egg basket, this dish, this, like, all this, just this stuff that fills all the cabinets. And, it's like, it's scary, right? Like how much we have.
Well, I've been lucky enough to see it with some, towards the end, that realize that this is it. I'm not leaving here with anything, and being able to, there's a lady I help out, and like, I work for, but I do help her out, and like,
she pays me money, but it's helpful to her too.
Right. Well, but
it's both.
I'd call her a friend.
Yeah.
And but she's, closer to the end than the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And there have been little things, like little toys or books or something that she's given to the kids. And it's like, I know that she's seeing that these aren't going to do me any good. Maybe they can help you. Maybe they'll bring a smile to your kid's face.
Yeah.
And, that's, it's a grace, I think, to be able to pass that on while you're still alive.
Yeah.
Instead of it all just going in the dumpster at the end.
Well, and I decided, it's funny because it's so easy as a dad to be like, and I say this is like a quote, you'll, come in any day of the week, and this is, okay, like I'll be yelling across the house, like, I'm sorry, I'm late to the kitchen. I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you were saying. I'm too busy, waiting over stuff I can't get past to get to you, and like, oh, you girls have to clean this up, and this is a mess. But
shoes is what gets me.
Yeah. No, and I'm way personally, I'm way more organized than my 7-year-old or 4-year-old. I'm not bragging about that. God, I should be more organized than them. But there was something where, like, we were talking to them about it. They have all these books, and a lot of them are given, like, it's I think we have a problem of just having too many things, but I think it's, for us, it's not necessarily equal to like a corresponding problem of buying too much. I'm sure we buy too much too, but we get a lot of stuff, and like we give, like, you guys, we trade with you and like other families and stuff.
Big benefit of having a large family.
That's right.
Is that,
but we don't always get rid of it then when we're done with it as effectively as I'd like. And I had cleared out an old desk for my new desk, and I had all this stuff that's just in a bin, like in my office. And we were talking the one day about like getting rid, like, girls, you got to get rid of books, you got to get rid of some stuffies or something, and they don't want to do it, of course. And then the conversation led to, like, I don't know if we have anything to put things in. Like, everything we have to put things in is filled up. So I just, in the moment, I had this real sense of trying to lead, and I just said, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I said, I have a box in my office I haven't done anything with that has stuff in it that I should get rid of.
Right.
So I will do that, and then we'll have a bin to use to put things in, which consequently has only been used for Renata to hide in lately, which is fine. But that was just one little thing. If someone's asking me for advice, I need so much more than I have to offer. But that's one piece that came to me where it's like, maybe try to lead with, like, okay, look in your closet and be like, I think Bishop Barron said this. He goes, I have shirts. He goes, I'm sure all of you do too. And he's like, I'm a bishop. Like, I wear this every day. He's like, I have like at least maybe 5 or 6 or 10 shirts in my closet that I'm like, I haven't worn that shirt, in like a year. And it's like, if you haven't worn the shirt in a year, you could probably get rid of it, And so I just, I think like that would probably be good for us to just try to practice some of that divesting.
Well, yeah.
Right?
And as
then when you have to do it at the end of life, it wouldn't be so hard.
Right. And as husbands, we need to lead from the front, to love as Christ loves the church. And you look at that, and you go through the passion, like, that's a tall order. That's but yeah, to lead from the front. And again, we can't do it on our own.
And he didn't, and forgive me, Lord, because he doesn't on his way to the cross say, I'm going as fast as I can, but I have to wade through all the sin that you've committed. Like, well, he doesn't.
Right.
So for me to like find ways, and sometimes it's funny, like you can't help it, whatever. It's just, you're a sinner.
Right.
But there's plenty of times where I find myself saying things that are really like, they're petty, or they're just, it's not, like, first of all, like, they're not even going to get it, if I say it that way. And it's just me trying to score points for, like, feeling sorry for myself or something.
Right.
And that doesn't do any good.
Yeah.
And eventually, when they do understand what I'm saying, runs the risk of souring our relationship, or, giving them a bad impression of how I should be. And yeah.
Well, and how often, we were talking about something else earlier, but just that, I think this is another example of something that's simple. It's, the concept is simple, that we're, to be perfect, it's like, that's it, be perfect.
Yeah.
But go ahead and try to be perfect. That's you.
Go.
Yeah.
No.
It's, day in, day out, moment to moment, and nothing that it needs God's grace in order to be able to do such a heavy task.
Well, and I think, those lessons and trying to stay focused on those things are so critically important, so that we are even possibly able to navigate, out there. I'm trying to find a good way to segue into this. I was just going to just say, so what do you think about politics?
Yeah.
Like, just drop
well, no,
enormous, like,
yeah.
Okay, everybody, here we go.
Yeah. Now into
COVID.
politics.
No, I'm just kidding. But no, because we were talking about this, and part of what led to this, idea of chatting, we were talking about, like, the Constitution, and just basic, like, political philosophy and mentality of, like,
right.
where does that come from? And that's a whole big, separate thing that, requires a more substantial, I think, exploration of what led to the founders, vocabulary, their conceptualization of a free state. But I think, how, I guess what I want to ask you, like, how do you see your role, especially because your faith has grown, because it might be different from, when you were I think, like, you and me both, like, I think a lot of us had this sort of just very patriotic kind of flag waving, high school or middle school guy, like, I'm going to go out and, do Top Gun or something like that.
Right.
And there's a lot of good to that. And that's what I thought we could chat for a few minutes about. How do you go, what's been your journey through a deepening sense, maybe, and dare I say, something that has maybe made you love, your country, maybe even more in a substantial way than just some sort of superficial way.
Yeah, well, I'd say to kind of start with that, I love America. I think it's the best country on earth. And
for context, we're both veterans. Well, you're still in the reserves.
So yeah, I'm in the Army Reserves. I've been a chaplain assistant since 2013. Mike actually swore me in.
I got him into this whole thing. No,
yeah. No, but I love my job, and as time has gone on, if I have questions, about, whether we're in a fight for the right reason, are we doing, because there's plenty of stuff. I mean, America has not been perfect. Mm-hmm. There's not every involvement that we've been in has been just, and you can,
and I think it's okay to admit that,
right?
Like, you're,
and it kind of,
not just okay. I think it's important.
Tying it back to, like, what family is perfect,
right?
Like, you're not going to find it. Like, we have a past.
Yeah, and
what family has a past.
What good does it really do if you kind of, I think you run the risk of even a kind of a delusion, basically,
right.
if you deify your family, right? If you deify your nation, right? That's why I get, the old saying, like, the my country, right or wrong. I think you can make an argument for that if you do it in the right way. Right. Not if what you mean by that is I will be okay with everything my country ever does.
Right.
Like,
well, and that's,
you know?
it ties into, obedience, revolution, revolt, obedience, and like, how does this all work together? And, biblically, we're given, and through the traditions of the church, we're, at its simplest form, you look at maybe, well, I think that's probably the right term, but you have the hierarchy in heaven. God creates the angels, and you have Lucifer think that he's like God.
Yeah.
And Saint Michael, who, being a lower angel, lower rung on the hierarchy, he doesn't, his battle cry is not, you are not like God, you're wrong.
Yeah.
It's who is like God? It's a question.
Me, you, all of us. Yeah.
Right. It's a question.
Yeah.
And
it's like a mirror of reality for a second. Like it's like a angelic reality check.
Yeah.
Like, no, this is real,
Right. And that's, So what we do in society, I think it needs to look like that in a way. You can't overthrow, a system, because then it makes the whole thing illegitimate. I don't know enough about the history of the U.S., the founding of the country, to really speak on that subject too much, but just that either way, it is what it is. The world stage is as it is now, and to change the system, what do you need to do? You need to be obedient. You need to do the right thing. And I'm not saying obey every law. In the military, in the Army, and the military, in the United States military in general, that we're to follow laws that are, we're to follow orders that are moral and lawful. Yeah. So if it's not moral,
right, not the caveat, the corollary, right, to that of to refuse to obey an unlawful order,
right?
Which has been, how many things, the negative things in the military's history would have been better or could have been avoided altogether if people just did what the book said to do,
right?
In that, because it's not easy to, when you're facing all that pressure.
Yeah. And I've seen it, and there are, whistleblowers and everything, but people who have seen, whoa, this isn't what we're supposed to do. This isn't right. We need to stop.
And they, they may not be like a moral philosopher. It might be some like 19 or 20-year-old kid who's just like, this doesn't feel right. Like that's your conscience,
Yeah. So, we're to obey our conscience, but, as long as what we're being told to do isn't, crossing your conscience, then,
Well, it's funny because you said about the history. The only thing I was wondering about with that I wanted to bring up was, okay, disclaimer. I am American, and I'm not defending, Great Britain's actions in the Revolutionary War. Here's just a little thought experiment. I find it interesting that their attitude, and I'm like hyper summarizing it, but their attitude was basically that a lot of the turbulence that arose and the taxation issues and stuff really in the wake of the French and Indian War were them basically trying to recover and to make up for a lot of suffering and that sort of stuff in the wake of a conflict that we largely requested them to help us with, in some ways, and some of their argument was like, look, we came over there to help you guys settle things out, and now you're trying to, rip the rug out from under us.
Right.
And this is treasonous, because to them that's the way they treated it basically. Yeah. And if you look at like George III's response, there's a great scene when like the Continental Congress appeals to him in the TV movie they made about John Adams, which is based on David McCullough's book, which is like a really, really well researched book, and so pretty faithful as best we can tell to kind of reconstituting it. And they're still hopeful. There's some of them are still hopeful that we're going to get some mercy from the king. And the king, he writes back and he's like, basically, listen, children, I am Dad. this is over. You're going to do what I say. And it's like, but as a Catholic, what I find interesting, the whole question of like, from the American side, where the argument goes that you've got decade after decade, generation after generation of a distinct, and I do think this is true, a distinct polity, of people, with a growing sense of their own traditions, their own connection to the land where they live, which is 3,000 miles away from England. And what's interesting is I feel like what happened was, my argument would be that subsidiarity won out. And the Catholic principle of subsidiarity, of love, that it's like part and parcel of the way God made us. And it's Scripture. Jesus talks about, right, if you're on your way to the judge and you have an issue, work it out with your brother. Right. And I think there's something, right. There's something in there that I think just happened as part, and you could look at all the deeper political and philosophical argumentation. But I think what really happened was we were, I think the colonists are basically saying we are an American nation, right? That's the reality, and we need to make this formally recognized with legal protections and all these kinds of things. Yeah, I think that was a big part of it.
So more so like
even more than I hate England, because a lot of them, wanted to find another way to have to do it. And when Adams then goes, like, I love the scenes in that not documentary, but that miniseries, because just to imagine, like, you think you've had an awkward job or awkward day, like to have, okay, John Adams, you are the first official representative of the United States to Great Britain, in 1790 or whatever year it was, 88, just in the wake of, even earlier, it was just in the years following, Yorktown in 1783, I think that was, 81 or 83. And so, just that, and he goes in and there's that great scene where he's meeting with the king, and the king's just standing there like, John Adams bows and he goes and he's like, the people of the United States, and he says, and the king's just like, just kind of goes, but that, like, but there's also a beautiful end of that scene where the king, it's a cordial meeting, it's so tense, but he says, and I think that the king's line is, just basically for the record, or let it be known that, I want it to be clear, like, I was the last to agree to the separation. Yet even so, I said and I say now that I will be, the first to, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, but like to work with the United States and to try to find a, and I don't know a lot about George III, but he did lose his mind as time went on. But my understanding is I believe he, at least to his own sincerity, or, sort of affirming his own sincerity, I think he was a very, sincere and kind of pious guy. Like, I really think he believed, in God. I think he believed in the divine protection of his position. I think he genuinely believed that it was wrong for us to separate, and was willing, to spend a lot of blood to stop it from happening. But I guess my point with all of it is, to me, like, do you think, maybe this isn't the question you expected, and you can comment on any of that, but I don't know, like, do you think many people have that kind of commitment in them these days, one way or the other?
Yeah, well,
like
with which
to really believe that deeply, in what's right and what's wrong. Everything just seems so atomized and just really selfish, and like, I do whatever I want.
I think you
can't build a society on that,
right? Definitely. You don't see it everywhere, but I think you do see it in places, and with that, on all ends of the spectrum, that's there are those who are willing to be martyred for their faith, whatever faith that is. I think that does exist still. That's very interesting. I've never thought about it that way. I've wondered about the U.S. a lot, and like, but the idea of, like, not necessarily, were we on the,
like, right or wrong, but
right or
like
wrong, but it was just as gravity works,
right?
That subsidiarity worked. and
and
just happened.
they appealed a lot to, like, they appealed to people like, Locke, and there were, obviously, like, a lot of, French authors like Montesquieu and others, to look at deeper questions of, like, conceptualizations of political philosophy, and how do rights work, right, and human dignity, and the, what is the extent of the authority of the king, and all these kinds of questions. But I also think there was a lot of appeal to, like, and I'm no expert on this, but, like, Magna Carta, and the concept of that really kind of, you see in that whole episode of, there's some kind of emerging sense of, in those centuries, some kind of emerging sense of the dignity of every human person.
Right.
And what I've really been appreciating lately, I've heard more and more people talking about this. There's so many people in our society, I think, who are using that language, or they're sort of appropriating all of the blessings and sort of consolations of a flourishing, free Christian society, while simultaneously trying to saw off the limb they're sitting on.
Right.
So, because that's where, like, oh, everyone's equal. Really? Says who? Because
isn't that kind of what the, I mean,
like, where does that come
basically
from?
what the Enlightenment did, though.
Yeah, it's like, everyone's equal is not something that you just come to naturally without some kind of revelation. Like, people, of course, people aren't equal. Like, you look around, like, there's a huge disparity of, like, people's skills, talents, abilities. So what does that mean? Everyone is equal, and so I hear people throw that around. But
in relation to what?
What they mean, or what they're trying to say, or what they're appropriating, I think, for themselves and their own nonsense things that they're into, is, no, all people are created equal,
right?
In dignity, because we're made in God's image and likeness, not because everyone, like, no two people on the planet are exactly the same, in intelligence or capability, or
I think we've kind of, like,
that's the equity. I think that's the difference between, like, I feel like equality and equity.
In math, you first learn addition, and then you learn subtraction, and then eventually, like, you get into, theoretical stuff.
More letters than numbers.
Right.
That's when I stopped. I couldn't do it so well.
I think, like, as a society, at least the Western world. I don't know about, the Eastern world so much, but I think what we've done a lot of is, like, okay, we're doing derivatives now, and, like, let's forget about addition and subtraction. Just throw that out. We don't need that.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, it works for a little bit until you start needing it.
Right.
And which you do, because it's at the basis of it. And I think that we've gone away from, we say these things and we don't even know why. We can't answer why we say them. Why one regime is bad. Like, show me scientifically why Hitler was wrong.
Yeah, it's not exactly a scientific, right?
Well, yeah, there's no, you can't. You can't. There's no metric for.
There's not a math equation you can plug the Hitler thing into that'll shoot out. Oh, there you go. That's why.
Yeah, morality has no measurement.
Yeah.
Well,
do you think it's because I feel like at the core of all, morality, and even, like, back to the kids too, like, there's, like, what, so why is it wrong for Noel to bite Renata, or for Renata rather, sorry, Noel, for Renata to bite Noel? Why is it wrong for my 4-year-old to bite my 7-year-old? Not, like, I can't just punch in some sort of, equation for it. It's that it's a violation of a relationship. It's a violation of responsibility. It's a violation of the, requirements of love. She's your sister. There's respect involved in this. There's, your duty before God, right, to treat others as you want to be treated. I mean, there's so many ways you could come at it. But at the bottom line, it's I think this podcast I told you earlier I was listening to from Acton University, and was it Dr. Hunter Baker, I think they were interviewing, and he was talking about some of these political philosophy ideas behind like a Christian notion of democracy and freedom. And he made the point that that we have to always remember that we are beings. I think he was quoting Ratzinger, that, we are, Pope Benedict, that we are beings created, right? So we're made in God's image and likeness. What does that mean? That we are created for, what I think I wrote it down, from, for, and with was the phrase he used. So, at all times we are from, for, and with. There is no room for a really strict individuality where I'm just my own entity.
Right.
Completely sovereign. No, I only exist because I come from God and our parents. Like my entire reality is entirely gift from other people, and from ultimately from God. And I am created and born into an already existing network of relationships and duties and friends and family.
Right.
So I'm not born into a completely isolated environment either, and I'm alongside others who are in their own way, coming into this. So that was a neat thought, where I was thinking, I feel like if any sort of political philosophy that tries to focus in on either one extreme, just the mass, right? Like more of a collectivist, communist kind of,
right.
We're all just a giant throng of cogs in the wheel. Well, that's no, because that doesn't respect the individuality. But then I think sometimes the more American mistake is to go so far to the extreme, and even people I would agree with, political conservatives and stuff, who are so, it's me, and I'm completely off on the hill with my signs up and my rifle, and don't tread on me, to that extreme. Well, no, you have responsibilities. Society has a right to expect certain things from you.
Right.
So the church talks about that with legal justice, where your society deserves to have you contribute to it.
Right.
Your neighbors deserve your love.
And that's even
that's a good point.
The hermits.
Yeah.
That's something I forget who I heard talk about it, but or maybe it was us talking about it. But the hermits that go out and live in a cave, don't see anyone, but they pray. And who do they pray for? The rest of the church.
Right. It's
it's
directly for the nourishment of the body.
Right.
Yeah.
That even
it's not for them. Yeah.
Yeah. That and that's the beauty of the church, is that it gives an all-encompassing thing, that even these outliers, the rugged individual, has a place in the society.
That might be part of your vocational discernment. Maybe you really are called to be this Simon Stylites up on the pillar for decades. And by the way, can I just throw in on that note real quick before I forget, because I think that needs to be brought up more in some of these debates in the house, in the church, where sometimes, sadly, you'll see, I've even heard of, I haven't heard any bishops directly do this myself, but I've heard of even bishops, who will sometimes criticize, some of the contemplative orders, or too much of an emphasis on Eucharistic adoration, and we need to be out there in the streets. And it's don't, your excellency, your eminence, you're missing this. It's not a one or the other, right? It's Mother, and I always cite, Mother Teresa's nuns. I mean, no one's more involved in the streets than them, but they start every day off with hours of intense adoration and prayer, in solitude. And then that, it's both. So it's Martha and Mary, know?
And just there will be no, I don't know, maybe government's the right term, but something that's all encompassing, like the church, that is able to contain all of these seemingly opposing ideas. But the beauty of the church is that we have all of this within it, that you can have the hermit that's not talking to anyone, is in the middle of nowhere, but praying for the church. And then you also have somebody who's setting up schools or hospitals or whatever, but it's still all for the church. And it comes from a hierarchy, that you have this thing at the top that you're all aiming towards, and then it spreads out, so that, you know, even the hermit in the middle of nowhere is doing something for the church, and those in the streets are doing something for the church. Like, it's the common goal. And I think that's something with America. Like, what is America? Like, that there used to be a notion, and I think it's gone. I mean, I maybe not totally gone, but it's something that needs to be
like rediscovered, maybe,
right? And I not rediscovered, because we're never going to go back. I don't think rediscovered, because we're never going to go back to, you know, 1940s, you know, everybody American flag in the front yard and buying bonds for the troops. Like, it's gone. We need something more. And I think that kind of ties into our we were talking about the family unit before, and leading our family unit. Well, our family units need to lead the country in we need something better than America. Yeah. You know, it's not just making it great again, it's making it better than it ever was. And how do we do that? Through Christ.
Well, I don't remember, it's not mine. I love it. I heard someone say that, you know, America, and I want it to be great, but it'll be great when it's, how did he put it? Something to the effect of, you know, I pray this sometimes too, like, Lord, make America great by making it good. Right. You know, like, it's great can just mean big, powerful, you know, mighty. Yeah. Okay. But you know, that's not the same as good, you know. Right. And to the extent that you are good, you'll have the right kind of greatness. You know, something that's worth passing on. And that's really what, I mean, tradition or education, like the most fundamental, what's the word I'm looking for? The most fundamental feature, I think, of education of any kind is you're basically transmitting a culture from one generation to the next, you know, and it has to be worth it.
Right. Yeah. And that's, you know, we shouldn't, I'm not saying, you know, throw out our past and, you know, start again. It's just to refine our past, take what we had, but polish it up, make it better. And that the future, if we're aiming towards the past, it's a failing, because then you're just going to end up here again. And I think that's, you know, conservatism, I've thought about this recently, it's always a step behind, you know, because you're just conserving 5 years ago.
Well, and
so you're never.
Well, I know we have to wrap up because we both have to get back to work. But maybe that's a good thought to kind of maybe, you know, end on, is what just came to mind was Lazarus, where you look at, like, you know, Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, the widow of Nain's son, the Jairus's daughter, right, the synagogue official's daughter. And like everybody he raises from the dead in the gospel, he brings back to earthly life. And he has his reasons, and it's meant to, you know, give people a foretaste of what's coming. But the difference between what he gives them and then what he does in his own resurrection and what awaits us, right? I feel like there's a similarity there in the sense that there's a lot of people that want to resurrect, you know, they want a Lazarus America to kind of bring something back that has died, rather than faithfully journey through this death we're feeling now, in a sense, to a new kind of you know, a totally different kind of thing, that all the good that's in it came from what was before, right? I mean, like, there's nothing in Jesus's resurrection, there's nothing in our resurrection that will somehow be something that came in after we were created. I mean, like, everything I am in heaven is going to be a glorified, perfected version of what I am now. Yeah. You know, so maybe there's an analogy there for, like, you know, we can have hope for a better America without falling into this trap of, like, we just have to go back and retrieve something from before. Maybe there's a different kind of work and faith that needs to be done.
I think it was St. John Chrysostom. So two things. One with Lazarus, and to tie in with this analogy, I think it was St. John Chrysostom that talked about Lazarus, that those, because he was a bishop then, right?
I think so. That's I think tradition is he and his sisters and maybe Mary Magdalene went to France. I think he was martyred later.
But
the early martyr,
tradition held that he always smelled of death.
Oh, really? I don't think I've heard that.
Yeah.
There's always a little reminder
I
of
think
it.
that's Chrysostom.
Okay.
Like, he was raised from the dead, but there was the stench of death upon him for the rest of his life.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So there's that. So, okay, you bring America back to what it was, but it's not going to be, it's always going to have that smell to it.
Right. Like the second death always comes,
right,
or
right.
that actual irreversible moment.
Right.
And something beyond it is the question.
To, something actually, like, it's nice to hear. I hear these talks all the time, and that's great. I agree with it. But then, what do we do?
Right.
The next point. And I think we talked about this earlier, but Saint Therese of Lisieux in Story of a Soul.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In Story of a Soul, she talks about wanting to lead. So the goal is to bring others to Christ, to make America a nation seeking Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Heart, mind, soul, everything.
Yeah.
And how do you do that? Well, Saint Therese of Lisieux says, she's talking about how she wants to bring everybody to how she loves Jesus. And she gives the image of, like the tidal waters coming in and, from the ocean, and a torrent, going back into the ocean, and how it sucks everything back into the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
And that how she's going to pull people to Christ is by going head first, as fast as she can, back towards him.
Flood everyone around you in your
right.
sphere of influence with grace.
Right. So how
the irresistibility of Jesus. Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
How do we change America? Seek Christ. Seek ye first the kingdom of God.
Yeah.
And with everything you got.
Yeah. That's as the late Al Cresto always, one of his slogans was, build the church, bless the nation.
Right.
And I always like that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's, I think that's a good.
Yeah. I think we'll put a bow on it there, and we'll do this again. This is neat because last time we talked about the Peshtigo fire.
Yeah.
And then so who knows what the next,
right.
the next one will be. So
looking at maybe going out there this summer.
Is that right?
Maybe I can get you some
some
footage of the fire museum.
We should do live footage. You standing there okay, I'm right here with you. That was a long time ago. Thanks so much, Matt, though, for coming on again. Appreciate it.
Yep. Yeah, love you, Mike.
Love you
Thanks
too.
for having me on.
Indeed. Cheers.
Cheers.
Yeah. That's always a lot of fun. And basically all we did, this was kind of his idea, the genesis of it, of just hey, let's set a camera up and just see where things go. Instead of a super formulaic, prearranged, topic or discussion points or anything, we just decided to kind of let her rip and see where we got. So hopefully you appreciated that, got something out of that. We'd love to continue the conversation with you. If you'd like to hit up the comments below or get in touch with me directly, and I can get in touch or get you in touch with Matt too if there's any questions you have for him. So thank you guys so much for stopping by the Gracious Guest Show today. And until next time, don't forget to wonder. Take care.